Welcome back to Odyssey of a Teenage Dirtbag, the true story of how a kid who once had nothing, no direction, no shot, built a life worth living. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. This podcast is about what it really takes to climb out from rock bottom and why that's always possible. Let's get into it. This is episode 3, Juvenile Rehab. I remember well the drive to Sundown M Ranch. I slept most of the way there, leaning against the passenger window of my mom's Nissan Pathfinder. It was cold, I remember, against my cheek as I just sort of stared out blankly at this expanse of eastern Washington desert. There was nothing in sight but shrub grass and tumbleweed growing through this desert rock and earth. The road sort of wrapped down and into this little valley where you could see an expansive facility spread out across several acres. The buildings were white with red roofs, and the whole compound stood out in stark contrast to the desert around it due to just this really lush green manicured lawns and tall shade trees sort of nestled into the desert like an oasis, the way it was all put together. The driveway ran initially just past the adult facility and then wound all the way back down to this large juvenile facility at the end of the property, across from some ball fields that had served as sort of this liminal space between adolescence and adulthood. The juvenile facility was 2 stories tall, and there was a big glass entryway and a sort of foyer for checking into the facility. My mom had signed me in, and then they took me back to a small room with a few older desktop computers with these preloaded assessment software on it. Some sort of chemical dependency assessment that was sort of supposed to determine the level of treatment that was necessary for me going forward. And it would ask me these sort of questions like, when you are out with friends socially, do you feel you are more confident if you were drinking? Or like, true or false, drinking makes you feel better about past experiences that were difficult or traumatic. And they were all sort of felt like this kind of questions that were trying to kind of catch anyone and everyone who took the assessment to have some recommended level of treatment or programming, no matter who you were, and I may be a little cynical about that. But I think even at that age, I understood that the facility had, a sincere financial interest in keeping me or anyone else there as a patient. So I took the test anyways, and without really any surprise, it recommended a high level of substance use treatment. And after the assessment, the lady at the front desk gave me sort of a tour of the facility, showing me, to where the lunchroom was and where the seminar hall was, the recreation room, and the boys' dorms. We stopped by my group therapy room to meet my counselors on the way for the tour, which I had like 3 assigned to the group that I was placed in. My main counselor's name was Jeff, and he was like, a former meth head musician kind of guy that had come out from a pretty comfortable life, but he made wrong choices along the way that led him to prison for manufacturing meth. And then there was Carl. He was like this old black guy from Hilltop, Tacoma, who used to just run the streets over on the west side in the 80s and 90s. And he had that sort of old school gangster vibe to him, that you'd only really know if you'd seen it before. It's just this vibe that you could check. And he was just kind of like this larger than life presence. Even when he wasn't speaking much, he just commanded the room, even with his arms folded. And then there was Katie, who was like your typical white lady drug addict type that, used coke, and then she'd used crack after that, and then turned to meth. And she said she would get sober and then, turn back to it all again. Until it was like the 4th or 5th time of sobriety when it all finally stuck. And she ended up going and getting training to become a counselor at rehab. And so anyways, these were my counselors, and they all kind of welcomed me to the group. And they'd given me a rundown, of what therapy would look like and how it would work. And they asked me about my drug use and my past. And I was pretty transparent at the time. I said what I'd used, from ecstasy to coke to oxy to weed to booze. And then they gave me a bedroom assignment in the dorm and sent me off to where I would be staying for the next 28 days. My room was small. It smelled sort of clean, or maybe like sterile is a better word for it. The bedrooms were all located on the second floor of the juvenile rehab facility. And from the upstairs hallways, there was this long, kind of large set of windows that faced a courtyard below. And the building was shaped kind of like a giant U, with the girls' dorm on one side and the boys' dorm on the other. Once you entered the bedrooms, there were sets of windows that faced the desert canyon walls and the basketball court below. And my room had 2 beds and a bathroom with a tub and a shower. And we had a radio alarm clock that sat between the beds, and you could tune it to about 3 of the local stations. My first roommate was a 15-year-old kid who was on his way out. He had 2 days left, and he was sort of excited to leave. And he seemed like a nice kid and seemed to kind of take interest in me right away. Being that I was a little older than him, he asked me a bunch of questions about what was my DOC or drug of choice, and where I'd come from, whether I had any criminal charges. At the time, I said I was clicked up, So I would brag about my friend group being sort of gang affiliated, but really we were just kids stealing and doing drugs and bullshitting. And so I wasn't really in a gang, but I would kind of brag like I was just as well. And the kid thought I was cool for it. And so, at this stage in my life, I really had a hard time with truthfulness. I got to be honest. I felt like I always wanted to be in absolute control over others' perceptions of me. And the only way to maintain that control was through crafting my own narrative about myself. It didn't matter if it was true or not at the time. As long as it ran parallel to the truth, I would say it. And so I would kind of lie about anything, anytime. The drugs, the crimes, the culture all had led me to just put a mask on in my day-to-day life, and lying was just a part of getting dressed for the day, So in rehab, I really had a loose foundation of truth in my life, and wasn't particularly interested in telling anyone about who I really was or what my life was really like. I only wanted to just project whatever I wanted them to believe about me. I wasn't dishonest in my therapy sessions, but even then, I almost felt the need to report more extreme drug use than my peers. Like, I felt like what I had done to be there really needed to be qualified, or that I needed to prove that I was really tough. It was just a weird time for me. I think most of my issues with lying were connected to my lack of self-confidence. No matter what I did, I always had the feeling at the time that I needed to be more than I was. Like I was never enough. I wasn't old enough. I wasn't successful enough. I wasn't tough enough. I wasn't strong enough. So I would lie about my age. I would lie about going to college. I would lie about fights I wasn't in. I just had a real problem with honesty at this phase in my life. And I think I hated who I was or who I had become. And my life had spun so far out of control that being able to lie was like this destructive form of taking back control. My first roommate stole my shoes when he'd left. I came back to my room to change shoes, and the blue and black DC shoes that I had brought with me were gone. The irony about those shoes is they were stolen to begin with. My friend Charlie had stolen them at a party, and I ditched them, and he had ditched them later in my car, and then just gave them to me sort of after a while. And they were really cool shoes. So I added them to my wardrobe, and I brought them with me along to rehab with a few other pairs. My roommate thought that they were pretty cool too, though, so he took them without telling me on his way out. Unfortunately for him, I reported the theft before he made before he had made his way all the way to the bus stop in town, and they were able to intercept him and retrieve the shoes. I remember being so outraged at the time. Like, how dare he steal from me? How dare this facility that I'd been at for a couple of days have such shitty security? How dare they? How dare everyone? It was like my first real good opportunity after a few days of stone cold sobriety to just blow off some steam. And I relished every minute of it. Getting sober did really help me gain a sense of clarity overall in my life, though. But the first few days you are angry and cranky. And then you taper into this, better appetite and later gain some genuine emotions back other than the anger. They'll start to poke through. But even still, I was missing out on my last semester of high school, and I wouldn't be graduating as a result. It was necessary for me to be there, and I was, starting to open up to myself a little bit about that. The facility had a classroom during the day where we would go to earn high school credit in a variety of computer courses. So I would spend most of my days there, Monday through Friday, working on schoolwork for no real reason. But they encouraged us to exercise as well in our free time. And we had a rigorous PE routine each day as well. And they said that the reason for that was to help us sweat the drugs out of our system. And the routine was good for me. I was making good decisions for the most part, but some old habits die hard. I'd been given access to a nicotine patch because I'd come into rehab with this severe cigarette addiction, amongst other addictions. And the facility allowed parents to kind of sign a waiver that provided nicotine patches to be provided for tapered use. The thing, though, about nicotine patches is they weren't only good for curbing nicotine cravings. If you wore a patch to bed, you would have the most lucid, vivid dreams. And so I would rent out my nicotine patch each night for $2 to my nearby roommates, and they would return it in the morning each day. $2 was our commissary budget that we could use to spend on anything from vending machines, so long as family had put some money on our books. And I had needed the patch back each morning because the facility required you to turn in the old patch before they would give you a new one. And so, accordingly, I collected rent each day on the patch while looking for other financial opportunities. Sometimes there was adults who would come down by the basketball courts to smoke cigarettes, and they would use the ashtrays there. I, of course, every time would ask them to bum a cigarette. And when they routinely said no, I would just wait a little bit and collect their butts. But, and their butts, the cigarette butts, I would then sell for, $2 each or something like that. And I always ended up selling, a handful of those each day. And then I finally, I'd sold my shoes that had previously been stolen to some other kid who was there. And I think we agreed on the price of like $50 or something like that. So he had to turn over his commissary money for like 20 days straight to me. And then I would give him the shoes. But after a couple weeks of all these little hustles, I had earned a couple $100s from various sales and rentals, and I didn't really need the money for anything, especially not in there, absent, a few packs of Skittles at the vending machine. But I liked the day-to-day grind of just being industrious and putting money away towards a bigger and bigger pot. It had given me something to harness my energy towards. So I found that kind of a meaningful way to spend my days. I had a crush when I was in there as well, and she was a sweet girl. Her name was Fiona, and she would make cat eyes at me each time we would have boys and girl time together in the lecture hall. We were permitted approximately 20 minutes of co-ed time each day, and so I would chat her up every time I would see her during that time as well. We were forbidden from passing notes to each other, and we could lose our co-ed time altogether if we were ever caught being like too flirty with one another, or if we ever made any physical contact whatsoever. So naturally, I lost my co-ed time pretty early in my stay due to too much flirting, and so I resorted to secretly passing Fiona notes. And she saved my notes like little treasures, but that ultimately would be my downfall, because when security searched the dorms in a sort of standard sweep, as they do, they found all my notes in her room, and I thought I was really clever at the time by addressing them to her as MJ, like they would never figure out that I could be Michael J, perhaps. and surely they would never, cross-reference the phone number that I put in each of the notes with their patients on file. I mean, I was busted dead to rights. The way the facility controlled us was through financial threats against our parents. Most of us kids already felt like we had ruined our parents' lives to some extent or another, so it was an easy pain point for all of us. They warned us that if we were kicked out of the rehab program without achieving successful completion, that medical insurance wouldn't pay for the time we'd been there up to that point if we were discharged unsuccessfully. And so they would tell us, do you want us to have to kick you out for breaking the rules and then bill your parents $26,000 for your failure to complete the program? Do you want your parents to lose their house because you broke the rules in rehab? Honestly, it was pretty damn effective. It kept me scared that I was going to ruin my parents' lives just that much more. And I was determined that the buck stopped there. So I didn't pass any more notes once I was busted. One thing our group counselors required of each of us, though, was to pick something tangible that we could practice every day to develop a sort of skill. It could be writing in a journal each day, or writing a poem, or drawing a picture on a sketch pad. They just wanted you to do something every day that you had to work towards or invest your time in to continue to grow at something. And so I chose for myself that I would learn to spin a basketball on my finger. And overall, it was a fun assignment to pick. I would just go to the basketball court each day and grab a ball from the rec bin, and then I would just try to spin that damn basketball every day, all day long. I would shove my hands in this twist, tossing the ball in the air, and then just try to slide my middle finger up, supported by my index finger, under the ball, and it would spin like a globe on its axis for a little while until eventually it would lose momentum and fall off each day. And I improved each day that I practiced. I improved just a little bit. It was like measurable progress because the ball would spin for a few more seconds one day after the next until I really mastered that balance portion. Then I had to train and transition my focus on really using my other hand to spin and gain momentum with the ball to keep it up. And it was like sort of a metaphor for my life. If I just kept the momentum, I could stay upright. If I only just kept at it and tried hard enough, I could keep on going longer. And just like that ball, I would keep on spinning. And if I would work hard enough, maybe I could turn things around for myself too. Eventually, the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into 28 long days. My counselor asked if I wanted to stay longer, as some kids found more success in their sobriety by doing a few extra months. And I said no thanks. I had court coming up in Idaho, and I needed to get back to my life. My high school class was graduating the next week, and I wouldn't walk with them, but I wanted to watch them anyways. The boys' side of the rehab dorms had this tradition where whenever somebody was graduating, the night before, we would open all of our windows about 5 minutes after lights out and yell out into the darkness and say our goodbyes. And they all shouted into the night for me that night, and we said goodbye and good night, like a burnout's version of the Waltons. And the next morning, my mom picked me up for the drive back to the west side. I picked up a pack of cigarettes on my way out of Yakima, and I stopped at a rest stop on the ridge that overlooked Sela Creek, and I wrote down the names of some of my friends that were still back at rehab. And I just smoked those cigarettes into the wind in their honor. And as the wind carried the smoke on and away, I reflected on my time and my time there. It hadn't been easy. None of it had. But I'd come to learn that what was easy and what was right were rarely the same thing. And in that moment, after 28 long days, everything was just right. Thanks for listening to Odyssey of a Teenage Dirtbag. Every episode is another piece of the story. Proof that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back up. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe below if you haven't already. Until next time, keep chasing the life you were meant to live.